So, this is going to be part two of the Scott Walker series, which I've titled The Godlike Genius of Scott Walker. That title is borrowed from a compilation Julian Cope released on Zoo Records in 1981 that focused on Scott's original material that was heavily orchestrated between 67 and 1970. And Cope was in a band called the Teardrop Explodes, and he was trying to basically reawaken his audience, which would be a British post-punk audience, to Scott Walker's more avant-garde orchestral material. So a lot of that stuff that I mentioned in the previous video, as far as like the AOR material, album-oriented rock, I guess. There's other terms for it. I have a soft spot for that type of music, and I'll get into that in other places. That type of music, or other videos, that type of music was viewed very negatively by Julian Cope. I think he saw it either as commercial attempts at getting like commercial hits for Scott Walker or as padding on the albums. Okay. But for Walker himself, the name of the Cope compilation is Fire Escape in the Sky, the Godlike Genius of Scott Walker. So Scott did in the late 60s, he did the four albums, the eponymous Scott 2, Scott 3, Scott 4. And Scott 4 didn't sell so well. By Scott 5, well, what would be Scott 5, it's called Till the Band Comes In. There's a little thumbnail of it. And this is the one where on tracks like Thanks for Chicago, Mr. James, Cowbells Shaken, and Reuben James, and actually, no, It's Over is not really, but those other three tracks are like country tracks. They're what we would consider country music, right? So it looks like you could sort of say that what had been for the Walker brothers and then those first four Scott albums, what had been sort of the more Brill building, Bacharach David type material, was now replaced by sort of country songwriters. So why was this happening and why was it appealing to Scott Walker? It's funny because I have a few sources. This is a digression, but I have this one issue of Shindig magazine that's devoted entirely to Scott Walker's 70s period. And then I also have a couple books on Scott Walker. And before I started doing this video, I wanted to find them so that I could, incorporate them a little bit in a sort of meandering way. And I couldn't find any of them. Scott is really, or was really dismissive of this material, more so than he was of the Bacharach David Brill building stuff that he did in the late 60s. And I think he saw it as he was jumping on a trend. The trend probably starts, and I'm not really authoritative. Don't have like the greatest authority in saying this, but I want to say it starts with Sweetheart of the Rodeo with Graham Parsons and the Byrds in like 67, 68, because that's where you have Graham Parsons, who is an avatar of country music, bringing it into the Byrds and having them cover not really songs that are sort of crafted by Nashville songwriters, but actually like OG sort of country songs. Um, and 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 also some of his own country songs. Graham Parsons would go on to record one full album and then another album that was released posthumously after he died. He worked with the Stones And the Stones had always had an element of country music in what they were doing, but he kind of pushed them a little bit more to get songs, I guess you could say, like Wild Horses and things like that, and stuff on Exile on Main Street, like Sweet Virginia and things, to be even more sort of authentically country sounding. And and then I think what also was happening was you had this breakdown where songwriters that were in Nashville, like Chris Christopherson and Willie Nelson, were able to be, they were working in Nashville. They were writing songs that Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard and people like that could cover. But they were, Bob Dylan also is an important factor too in this. I'll get to that in a second. But they were starting to write songs that bridge this gap between the the country music sort of establishment, which you'd consider to be very sort of straight laced, not countercultural, and the countercultural sort of movement that we'd associate with the hippies in the late 60s and stuff. I mentioned Dylan. Dylan did Nashville Skyline. Um, and no, I was going to say Self Portrait, but the New Morning has a lot of country stuff on it. The Grateful Dead, they'd been incorporating a lot of country stuff. I think that the Byrds' Sweetheart of the Rodeo was really important because it was the first instance where you had a 60s psychedelic band. Well, they weren't really psychedelic anymore, but a really foundational American 60s band actively embracing country music as a genre going to Nashville. So Nashville is a place where a lot of this songwriting is happening. After Till the Band comes in, Scott records, well, he had a TV show, and there's a release for that called Scott Sings Songs off of his television show. That's out of print. You can get it on vinyl, but it's not on CD, unless there's maybe bootleg. And then there's a, an album called The Moviegoer, which has him doing songs from films. And then he did these two albums, which are Stretch in 73 and We Had It All in 74. Okay. And this is, so the first song is Sunshine by Mickey Newbury. Mickey Newbury wrote I Just Dropped Into a Condition My Condition Was In. He was also a friend of Townes Van Zandt. It's got a Randy Newman song, Woman Left Lonely, No Easy Way Down. That is a Brill Building song. Frisco Depot by Mickey Newbury. Jimmy Webb songs. Jimmy Webb is also a force in this countrifying of rock music. And that's what's going on with Stretch. By the time he gets to We Had It All, the songwriter that he's utilizing the most is Billy Joe Shaver. I actually got to see Shaver in the mid 90s, and his son was still playing with him at the time. And I think that there was a book that I had, and I do have it. It's like Scott Walker track by track. And it said that the preponderance of Shaver songs on here is because a Waylon Jennings album called, I think it's called Honky Tonk Heroes. I don't listen to a lot of Waylon Jennings, but Waylon Jennings is part of the outlaw country thing, had a lot of Billy Joe Shaver songs on it. And that album was just very impactful on Scott. So Scott covers a lot of Billy Joe Shaver songs on this. He covers Black Rose, Ride Me Down Easy, Back to Back, and Old Five and Dimers like Me. And then there's also a version of Sundown by Gordon Lightfoot, which is possibly the best version of Sundown. So when Scott's doing these albums in the early to mid 70s, that's where the country, at the same time, the countrypolitan sound is kind of coming up in Nashville, where you have um, what I guess it's kind of what's going on now, where you have country artists and country songwriters making music in that genre, but trying to appeal to a broader audience. So the way that it gets incorporated into Scott stuff, and it might have been over there too, is that there's strings. There's strings. So Sundown has like really remarkable strings on it. I put this album on, or this, it's two CDs. I'm gonna go put this on actually after I finish this video. I put this on, I can listen to it all the way through. It's really great, right? There's another thing too that I think is really important if we're talking about Scott Walker and his country period and these albums, is that there's a track on here, and it's called "Can't Find My Way Home," or it's called "My Way Home," and it's from '71, and it was a B-side to "I Still See You." This compilation makes a point of putting it on there. It has strings, and it is, I would put "My Way Home" in my top 5 favorite Scott Walker songs of all time. And so what happened is, from what I understand, is it was in '71 that it got released, and he was still in England. So what happened was he had this sort of homesickness for the US, and while he was in England, so he writes this song "My Way Home" about the highways and, you know, traveling the vast distances in the US that he kind of was like longing for. So now, when I talked about in volume 1 of these videos, Scott Walker having this kind of mythic idea of England, and then getting to actually go to England and sort of seeing the sort of idealistic image or impression of England firsthand. Now he's in England, he's been there for a while, and he's homesick. So he writes a song to capture what he now feels he's missing about America. So I think that starting with "Till the Band Comes In" and going through "Stretch" and "We Had It All," and especially on "My Way Home," I don't think that that's it's a huge commercial thing. There possibly is, because, you know, certain songs like what's that one song, the PT Valley whatever, and there's these certain commercial, like country songs, by the time I get to Phoenix and things like that, they had a certain commercial success. Maybe that influenced him to a certain extent, or influenced the people who are putting songs in front of him, and he wasn't writing very much. But I think that those that type of his gravitation towards this type of music was an authentic sort of expression of his homesickness, right? And I think that it really captures where he was at that time in his career. Now, he gets back with the Walker brothers in '75, and they do "No Regrets," which follows the pattern of "Stretch" and "We Had It All" very closely. He does "Lines," which also follows that pattern. And that's '75, '76. And then "Night Flights" is '78. That's going to be the last Walker Brothers album. And then we're going to get into Scott Volume 3, right? But I want to say that, well, you take The Moviegoer, which I don't have, and you take Scott sings songs from his TV series, when there's some Jacques Brel stuff on there. But you take these two, you take "Till the Band Comes In," and you take "No Regrets" and "Lines," and you get a really fully fleshed out, sophisticated country sort of career. That those songs, if you like, an artist that I started listening to recently that I really like is like Jimmy Rabbit. And like there's lots of people that I had for my country music. The really stock stuff was always John Prine, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Townes Van Zandt, especially, um, Graham Parsons, lots of things like that. But then there's other things that when I'm making playlists that I check out. Conway Twitty, I started checking out. I was like, oh, some really good stuff here. Reba McEntire too, and she's obviously later. And who's the other one that I was thinking of when I was just saying this? Conway Twitty and Jimmy Rabbit. Jimmy Rabbit really has that sound. And I want to just really emphasize that I really like I really like that 70s countrypolitan sound. It's not, there's no, with today's country music, and I didn't research any names, so I made a mistake. Morgan Waller, is that a guy? It sounds like that would be a guy, right? So, and then other people like that, they have songs about driving a truck to a bar and, you know, these sorts of rural, the sort of like plight of the rural man trying to have a beer, and it's very, very artificial. Whereas I think with the stuff that I'm talking about in this video, and this Scott stuff is on the more polished side. I think that it's not doing like country people, rustic environments, rural people, and the injustice of like patronizing them. I think it's letting them get this music that's achieving a certain sophistication that the pop music of the 60s and 70s had, right? So I think it's antithetical to modern country. I think that it's very, it's well done, it's well orchestrated, it's catchy, it's pleasing, and it's not insulting to your intelligence, whereas I'd say contemporary country is primarily insulting to your intelligence. So after Night Flights, we're going to get into this. This is 84, right? Climate of Hunter. That's going to be in volume 3. But when Julian Cope released Fire Escape in the Sky in 81, the walk, Night Flights had come out in 78. Scott was just kind of MIA. He wasn't really doing anything. And so this was Julian Cope's way of trying to reignite interest in Scott. And what he saw was the valuable side of Scott's career, which Scott ultimately agrees with, even though Scott in a way basically disowns everything that he does at some point, you know? He's really interesting in that way. He wasn't performing. He couldn't go and perform and play like the hits or whatever, because he would maybe do a TV show where he play a song. Like there's a video of him playing the last song on Tilt on a TV show. But after he's done with something, he's done with something. He doesn't revisit it. He doesn't play the hits. That's a form of the avant-garde, right? So Julian Cope picked up on this avant-garde aspect of Scott Walker. But I think that orchestral stuff that Julian Cope was prioritizing over the AOR stuff, I think that stuff found its way into this country era. Scott Phase 2, we'll call it. I think that it was there. I think that Scott Phase 2 was not milk toast and vanilla or whatever. I think that it was a really just a great period. It's like if you were listening to Sinatra or something. Sinatra didn't write his own songs, but there's certain periods of Sinatra where you're like, oh, this is just really good. It's not unnecessarily provocative or challenging. Unnecessarily provocative and challenging is going to be a big part of video 3. So if you like this video, like it, subscribe, listen to the Happy Casualties. Thanks.